All right, well, welcome everyone as you're joining. We are getting started here in just a minute. It's now 6:30. I hope everyone's enjoying this weather. We got some much needed rain here in the Central Valley. I don't know. All right, so for those of you that are logging on and need Spanish interpretation, you should see on the bottom of your screen a little globe that says interpretation. And when you click on that, that will enable that Spanish translation for you. So let's see. Do you see that globe still, Wendy? On the bottom of your screen? Yes, okay. All right, so that should be all set to go for everyone. So again, and if you are going to use that feature, our interpreter, Rebecca, will do that for you. But if you could put in the chat box that you were using that feature so she can get acquainted with you and get adjusted. So we'll go ahead and get started. What I'd like to do is just real quickly tell you a little bit about the Family Resource Center and do some housekeeping. So the Family Resource Center is a part of Clovis Unified. I serve families birth to 22 who have children, either in early intervention, birth to 3, or special education. I help them navigate those services, get connected to resources you might need, or families that have concerns about their kiddos' development and need help even understanding how to start the process of figuring out what help they might need. You are welcome to reach out to me. If you are not in Clovis Unified, you are still welcome to call me. I can help you get connected to the Family Resource Center that does serve your area. So a little bit of housekeeping. Rest assured, we cannot see you. We are in Zoom mode. That means that you're only seeing our panelist screen. We cannot see you, so you are welcome to snack, recline in your recliner chair, make yourself comfortable. We don't know what you're doing, so it's all good. Because we can't hear you though, there is a feature on the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. That is question and answer. If you could please use that as we go along tonight to ask any questions, it really will help me as I'm monitoring that and be able to share those with our presenter, Wendy. It just is much an easier format to use. The chat feature is there too if you want to communicate with each other. Raise the volume. We're hard to hear. I just see in the chat. I don't know that we can raise our volume necessarily because it's as loud as it's going to get. Yeah, I've got my audio settings set pretty loud. They're all the way up, so I apologize. But anyway, so use the question answer feature for questions, the chat for communicating with each other, say hello. If you want to tell us where you're from, that's great. So really quickly, I'm going to launch a poll as I get the PowerPoint. Here we go. The PowerPoint set up for our presenter. I'd like to introduce you to Wendy Karsevar. She is our district's 504 coordinator. She is a treasure. And so I'm very grateful that she is willing to spend some time with us to educate everyone. You will find her a very helpful resource. And so with that, I will share my screen and get us started here. hold on, I've got to move this. You would think after a whole year of webinars, I would just be so proficient at this. I'm not. I'm clearly just faking my way through here. So I want, there we go. I want full screen. Why is it not going? So I want slideshow. There we go. Okay. Ta-da! All right, Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us tonight, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk about 504. As Leanne said, I am the District 504 coordinator for Clovis Unified, and that's all I do all day long, every day, is talk about 504, and actually it's rather my favorite subject. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity, and this webinar really is intended to be just kind of a basic introductory to Section 504. I will talk about what a 504 plan actually is, what the Section 504 law is, and I will also talk a little bit about how you go about exploring if you're a parent and you think that your child might have a disability that may qualify for a 504 plan. I'm going to talk about that as well. Leanne, how do I get rid of this? Oh, I think I just, okay, got it. Okay. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so there's certain language that we use for Section 504, and it really centers around Section 504 is basically an equal opportunity law or a non-discrimination law. Okay, it guarantees equal opportunity, but it does not guarantee equal outcome, and that's that little picture that you're looking at there. Okay, Leanne, can we go to the next? Sorry, I'm not real proficient at the technology.
I don't know why my button is not, my keyboard button isn't working to switch the screen. So there we go. Technical difficulty. I apologize.
Oh, sorry
everyone.
About that.
And real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt, Wendy. I'm going to, in a moment, post in the chat box. There is a link to the PowerPoint for tonight. I know we're already getting some questions about that. Okay, so look for that in the link. The link in the chat in just a moment. All right, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, thank you. So where Section 504 comes from, it's the formal name is actually Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And that's kind of a long name. Leanne, can we go back a slide? Kind of a long name, but it is the first, let's see, one more. There we go. Okay, it's the other way. There we go. Okay, I think we got it. Okay, so it's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's the very first civil rights law that guaranteed equal opportunity for more than 35 million Americans with disabilities. And what that means is, and if you think about the time, okay, so 1973, it came right on the heels of the civil rights movement from the 1960s, okay? And that civil rights movement from the 1960s, the folks that were the advocates for people with disabilities sort of saw that happen and kind of jumped on the coattails of that, which was a very good thing. It's amazing to think that prior to, even though 1973 is almost 50 years ago, prior to that, there was no law on the books that stated that people with disabilities could access equal rights. So we're grateful that happened, but you know, and even though 50 years ago seems like a long time, it's really not that long ago when you consider how long we didn't have it. Anyway, so that's where it comes from. Okay, next slide. Okay, it protects students with disabilities from discrimination and entitles them to regular or special education and related aids and services. One of the things that I am going to talk about a little bit, like I said, this is just kind of an introduction, is that I know that a lot of people are familiar or have heard of special education, but haven't necessarily heard of Section 504. So how I kind of describe that is that special ed comes under the IDEA, which is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay, and that we kind of look at IDEA as the mothership, and then special ed is under that umbrella, and then just below that is Section 504. Okay, and the reason why I share that is because all children who have an IEP under special ed, they are also protected under the Section 504 law. Okay, now we don't do two plans in our district. We don't do like a child, as an example, let's say a child has an IEP for, as an example, speech and language services. Okay, so they have a speech language IEP, but then maybe they also have diabetes, or they have some other disability that qualifies for Section 504. Well, we don't do two plans. We meet the needs of all of those things under the IEP. Okay, so all children that have an IEP are also protected under Section 504. It doesn't work in the reverse. So all 504 students are not part of special ed. And I say that because Section 504 is considered accommodations, or it's considered, it's a plan that operates with the student in the general ed program. Okay, and I'll get to that more in a little bit. Okay, and what it states is that no otherwise qualified individual with a disability shall solely by reason of that disability be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And what that means is that if a school is a public school, and that includes college, okay, so and I think a lot of people do know and understand that students that have an IEP will eventually age out of that IEP, right? Well, that is not the case for Section 504. If a student has a Section 504 plan, or a 504 plan, which is what we call it, they can take that to college with them if they go to college or junior college, or wherever they never age out of their 504 plan. So it's like it doesn't expire when they turn 18. It doesn't expire when they turn 21. It stays with them if they need it. Okay, and that's public school. So private schools don't have to honor or evaluate for a 504 plan. As an example, some of our schools locally, we have some private schools. We have OLPH, we have San Joaquin Memorial, Fresno Christian. And I mention all of those schools because they actually will, if a student goes to one of those schools, they will do the accommodations that are on that 504 plan. They're all really good about that, but they don't have to. They're not required to by law because they are not a public school. But any public school is obligated, because we are receiving funding from the federal government, we are obligated and required to implement Section 504. Okay, A 504 plan is designed to accommodate the unique needs of an individual with a disability as required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Children who have disabilities, but whose disabilities do not interfere with their ability to progress in general education, are not eligible for special education services, but may be entitled to a 504 accommodation plan. So we have, and I'm not going to say a lot, but we have students that their parents feel like, I think something's going on, I think I need, and they meet with the school to try to figure out what's happening, why their students are struggling, and they sometimes will do a special ed assessment, and sometimes they don't qualify because they don't meet the threshold for eligibility for special ed or for an IEP, but then they may meet the threshold for 504. So that's when that's not the only time we look at 504, but a lot of times that does happen if they don't qualify, but they don't qualify for the IEP, but they still have a qualifying disability that makes them eligible for Section 504. Okay, so what eligibility looks like is we call it a three-prong analysis for eligibility determinations. The child has to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. Okay, so and the reason why that's important to understand is because just like let's say a child gets a diagnosis of ADHD as an example. Okay, so just because they got a diagnosis from the doctor for ADHD, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is impacting them at school to qualify them for eligibility for 504. So that's why we have to do an evaluation. And the other thing that I want to say about that is that there's sometimes some confusion about having a diagnosis or not having a diagnosis. Okay, students do not have to have a medical diagnosis in order to qualify for Section 504. Again, we do our evaluations, but they don't necessarily, and a lot of the kids do have a diagnosis, but they don't have to, and we can't require it. The difference there is with, as far as like some of our physical medical conditions that do come with a diagnosis, such as diabetes or asthma or some life-threatening allergies that we see quite a bit, because those always come with doctor's orders and recommendations for how we do accommodate for the students. So that is the one difference. If a parent believes their child is diabetic, but they don't know that, we need to know that from a medical professional if that is the case. Okay, yeah, let's go to the next one. Okay, so the steps to 504 eligibility and development of a 504 plan, we do it in 5 steps. The first step is what we call child find, and that's part of the special education Section 504 IDEA law, is the child find law. The step 2 is assessment or evaluation. Step 3 is the eligibility standards. Step 4 is placement or FAPE, and step 5, and FAPE, I'm going to go back and talk about that. Step 5 is implementation. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is we do an evaluation or an assessment. We look at the eligibility. We look to see if those 3 prongs are met. Okay, then we determine if so FAPE stands for free appropriate public education. Okay, and so we determine if it's a 504 plan, then that student is going to most likely stay in their regular ed program with accommodations. Okay, and then implementation just means we're starting a 504 plan and we're going to do what it says. Okay.
Wendy, I think this is a good point to ask a question real quick that is
Okay.
in the question answer. Mama is asking, she has concerns about her daughter. When's a good time to start this process?
Okay, so when you do have concerns, that's the time. That's the time. And if I don't know if you mean like when's the time, like during the school year, it doesn't matter. Any time when you start to feel like there's concerns, I would highly encourage you to go to, you can start with your child's teacher. If your child is in secondary, like middle school or high school, I would go to their counselor, start with their counselor at that school. But if they're in elementary school, start with their teacher. And what's likely to happen is the teacher, you can go to them in person or you can email them, call, whatever. What is likely to happen at that point is they may say, okay, let's have a meeting, or they might say, let's have a student study team meeting. Let's start there and let's start looking at the concerns that we have. And so that's kind of where the process will likely start. But it's really important to contact somebody at the school site. And if you're not quite sure who to contact, you can always email me and I can direct you to who to go to.
And are there timelines involved, like with special education?
Yes, there are.
Where once a parent reaches out, what does that look like? What are the next steps, Wendy?
So, well, it's kind of once a parent reaches out, it's kind of determined by what happens next. So if you have a student study team meeting or a parent teacher conference or something like that, okay, so somewhere, like typically in the student study team meeting, it'll come out in that authentic discussion that the student, we probably need to go forward with this. We probably need to move forward with a potential 504 evaluation. Or they may say, this looks more like an IEP, like they may go right for that. But they will consider all the things. And I did see a question pop up about if they have good grades, do they not qualify? Not necessarily. It's a big picture kind of thing. It's really all about a significant impact on a major life function. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, the major life functions, what we consider those. I will tell you, grades are a thing that we look at, but it's really all about how are they being impacted. I mean, we do have students that are GATE students and AP students that have 504 plans. So that, that's not an automatic yes or no. So it just depends on what's happening with the student, how they're being impacted, what is the disability or the suspected disability. It's on a case by case kind of basis.
Okay. And there was another comment that someone mentioned that they thought that the law was amended to say it only has to be a suspected disability. And I think you did mention that. Yeah, it does not, they do not need a diagnosis.
Right.
Somebody asked what is a student study team meeting, what goes on. I think you addressed that a little bit, that it's going to be where the team players are going to get together and talk about what the concerns are, right? But I also, just so you all know, tomorrow morning, you're going to receive an email from me with all the resources from tonight and links to everything. And I have a sheet that talks about what a student study team is. And I can include that in your handout so that you guys have access to that, to give you a little more background so that we can continue on the 504 discussion. It kind
Yeah,
of veers
and
off
just,
onto all these different topics.
no, it's okay. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
how it goes. The
But
student
thanks,
study
great
team,
questions.
just to touch on that a little bit, the
Mhm.
student study team will include likely your child's teacher, and it could be the school psychologist might participate. There's usually a student study team coordinator on campus. There could be, you could have an administrator in there. That it just depends on who they're going to gather, but it's going to be a group of individuals, and of course the parent. I mean, that's, first and foremost. So that's, and it's just a discussion, like Leanne said, about what are the concerns? What are we looking at? What are the concerns? And where do we go from here? Like sometimes in a student study team, um, sometimes it comes down to, okay, let's try some accommodations and see if that works, and then see where we go for it. It just depends on the individual situation. It's different for every student and at every school, but that's a
Right.
good starting place.
And Wendy, I think this is a good time to maybe bring up too. I know because I serve families across the district, as do you. I get a lot of questions as to, well, how come, a site wants to do an SST instead of going directly, to a 504 and or an IEP, and I want these documents. But I think sometimes what's hard for us as parents to remember is that the school has an obligation to provide an education to children in the least restrictive environment. And so often, like you said, they just want to start with that meeting of gathering everybody together in one place and talk about what those next steps need to be. And so sometimes families feel like, well, it's a delay tactic, but really it's information gathering and seeing, like you said, can we provide supports without having to remove this child, from his gen ed setting, and just maybe there are things that can be provided with less intrusion. So
well,
anyway.
and you're absolutely right. And one thing I didn't, you asked earlier if there's timelines, and there are. So once we get to the point of there's an actual referral for a 504 plan, and then we're going to work on an evaluation plan, or in special ed, you guys call it a assessment plan, right? So it's the same timeline. So once that referral is returned, signed from the parent, then we have 15 days to put together our evaluation plan. Then after that gets signed, and we return that to the parent, okay? Then once that is signed with consent for us to evaluate, once we get to that point, then we have 60 days to complete the evaluation, hold a meeting. And again, I can't tell you exactly what that evaluation looks like, because it looks different for every student. One thing I do want to make note of is that if we have a child that comes to us with a diagnosis from a doctor that they have diabetes, or that they have like a very serious medical condition, we don't go through all that whole timeline. We try to expedite that. We work very closely with our nursing staff, who are amazing, and and we get that expedited as quickly as possible, so that the individualized health safety plan usually goes hand in hand with the 504 on cases like that. So but yeah, we don't have to exhaust the 75-day timeline on a situation like that.
Okay.
Okay, so so this one is kind of hard sometimes to understand, or for people to wrap their head around, but and I'm going to say it a couple of times during this presentation and in a couple of different ways. Okay, so 504 does not guarantee results or it guarantees equal opportunity, but it doesn't guarantee results or grades. Okay, so the sole purpose of 504 is no discrimination. And sometimes what that looks like is with accommodations, we are doing our best to provide an equal opportunity for a child that has a disability so that they're getting the same opportunity as their peers that don't have that disability. Okay, does that make sense? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm seeing a question here about the timeline. Can
I
go ahead
am
and
too. I
respond
just
to
was
that?
going to bring that up. There's a couple. Oh, one is they want to know, does that include summer break or holidays, or does that timeline pause?
The timeline pauses.
Okay, and then the
Okay.
second question is the timeline written in the Section 504 law, or is that determined by school districts?
Okay, so that is so no, it is not written in the 504 law, the federal law. It is determined by our school district, because all it says is that it must be completed within a reasonable time. So a reasonable time is that's the thing about Section 504, there's a lot of gray. Okay, so we as a district, and I've been doing this for 11 years, this goes back long before me. So we follow the special ed timelines because we feel like that keeps us on track. It keeps us, because according to the 504 law, we could be talking about this all year if we considered that a reasonable timeline. We don't, so we feel like we need those parameters and we will follow those parameters. Okay.
Thank you, Wendy. These are great questions.
They're very good questions.
I know. Good job, everyone. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So who determines eligibility? The school site's 504 team reviews requests for 504 evaluations, completes the evaluations, and determines 504 eligibility. Not physicians, psychologists, counselors, private therapists. So that sometimes can be confusing because a lot of times a parent will take their child to the doctor and the doctor will say, and a lot of times the doctor will write it on a prescription script, okay, that student needs a 504 plan. That doesn't mean that they're going to qualify. So just because, again, I'm coming back to just because they have a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean they're going to qualify. Our team has to complete our evaluation and determine if they have met the 3 prongs for eligibility. And I do want to say this. So the bottom, that next paragraph, schools are not required to accept outside evaluations of a child to determine 504 eligibility. The school site's 504 team has the right to conduct their own evaluation and determine eligibility. But on the flip side of that, I want to say that we do in our district consider what is recommendations that are coming to us. So if a child comes to us with this huge report because their parents have had them assessed at an outside clinic or an outside doctor or whatever, we consider that to be extremely valuable information. And so we do include it as an important part of our evaluation. Okay. Okay, so the 504 determination is a team decision. And I want to talk about the team. I think I have it on another slide, but we'll go through this. So once a referral has been made, the 504 team decides either the team will complete the 504 evaluation, complete and send home a notice of Section 504 evaluation. And that's what I mean when I say the evaluation plan, or they may decide that they're not going to complete a 504 evaluation and they will send home a different formalized letter it's called a review of referral for Section 504 evaluation. And I can tell you that sometimes it's really based on what we're seeing right now. So sometimes a parent will say, well, I'm concerned about what's going to happen next year and how my child is going to perform. And I will tell you that when we do an evaluation, we are looking at what we're seeing right now. So what are we seeing right now? And it's always possible, and this does happen too. So sometimes a school will decline to evaluate based on what we're seeing right now is that the student doesn't appear to have a significant impact on any major life function, or we're not seeing it at school. So that does happen. So sometimes they'll say, okay, we're not going to evaluate right now because we're seeing a healthy, well-rounded, very much thriving student, and we don't see a significant impact, okay? Or they may evaluate the child and we're still not seeing the significant impact and the child doesn't qualify. So one of both of those things can happen, and I want to make sure that you understand that doesn't mean that's a forever decision. So let's say, and we've seen it quite a bit in the last couple of years, that a student that couldn't qualify prior, well, some other things have happened. So like next year, the parents come back to the school site and say, hey, you know, we're seeing a decline, or we're seeing some disturbing patterns with our child and we want to evaluate again. Well, we can evaluate again. So next year we can evaluate again. And now at that, and again, I've seen it quite a bit, that now they qualify because now we are seeing a significant impact. Okay, so it's just the thing to remember about Section 504 is that there always has to be a disability or a suspected disability, and it has to have a significant impact on a major life function. Okay, so we might not see it now, but maybe next year we do see it. Or maybe for, you know, a specific student, we didn't see it last year or the year before, and we just evaluated, and now we do see it. So now the child qualifies. Okay. Okay, so the 504 team members include the site 504 coordinator, the teachers. If it's an elementary, it's just probably going to be 1 or 2 teachers if they deploy, parents, students, school psychologists, school nurse, and other designated qualified staff. So you might have, like I mentioned earlier, you might have administration on there. It just depends on what that school looks like. And also, as I mentioned before, it's a 504 team decision to complete the 504 evaluation or deny the request. Both require written notice to the parent and a copy of the parent rights. Okay, so once again, I'm going to reiterate, medical diagnosis itself is not sufficient to constitute an evaluation or to qualify a student. I am seeing a question. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of questions because they're popping up on my screen. And I want to respond to that.
Okay. Yeah, so let's backtrack here. So one parent asked, if a student is on a 504 plan, who decides when they no longer need to be on one?
Okay, so that's a really great question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that we see in the special ed side of the house, they do a triennial assessment. Okay, and that's every 3 years they do a full-on assessment of that child, and a lot of times the child outgrows their IEP. We don't really see that a lot with Section 504. So as an example, if once a child qualifies and they have ADHD, they're always going to have ADHD. So it's not likely that they're going to no longer need the accommodation plan, but it does happen. And I'll tell you who decides that, because we call it a reevaluation every 3 years, but it doesn't look anything like the triennial for special ed. Okay. It is not a full-on evaluation. It's basically a discussion at the annual meeting of all the team members, including the parents. And we talk about, do we still see a need for the 504 plan for the student? And what I'm saying is that typically we continue to see the need. Okay. What does happen, and I've noticed it a few times in the last couple of years, every once in a while, a parent will contact us and say, I think that my student is really doing really well, and I don't think he needs the 504 plan anymore. And so a parent can request that their child, that the 504 plan, they want them exited out. And so we honor that request. When a parent requests that, we will honor it. But really, it's a team decision. Okay, and then the next question I see is, when you say referral, is that a request from the parents for a 504? Okay, so, or is it from the school for a 504 evaluation, or is it from the school? This is from Whitney. So a referral is, once, let's say you've gone to that SST, then the team will determine together if that's what we're talking about. If we are actually talking about a request for a 504, it can come from a parent, it can come from a member of the school staff, it could come from the teacher. We have them come to us from all different, sometimes the nurse will, sometimes a parent will come to the nurse and inform them that my child has just been diagnosed with diabetes. And then the nurse will contact the site 504 coordinator and say, okay, we've got a student that has diabetes. We need to get rolling on the 504 plan. So the referral can come from anywhere, anybody that's connected to the student.
So a little bit ago, Wendy, you mentioned child find in one of your slides. For those of you that aren't aware of that term, that's what that means. That is the district's obligation to, if they identify that a child has a special need or a disability, that they then are responsible for taking action on that and seeing if that child needs extra support. So that's what that term child find means.
Thank you for mentioning that, Leanne. And I want to piggyback on that, because I want to make the point that sometimes, like, you might not, as a parent, you might not know that your child has a disability. You're just noticing things that are concerning to you. And so, by you bringing that to us, it's kind of like together we're all answering the child find law, right?
Right.
By making, it usually starts with, and again, sometimes it is coming from a diagnosis, but a lot of times it's just a parent going, we're really struggling. I'm noticing some patterns, or I'm noticing, A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z, and that's really concerning me. Is that really how it's supposed to be? Is every other student doing this or having this issue? And so that really is important, because that opens up the dialogue. And if the parent, and sometimes it's the teacher going to the parent and saying, hey, I'm noticing A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z, and it's concerning me. And the parent sometimes will say, oh, me too. I'm noticing that too. And then we start this conversation, and then that gets us on the path to where we need to go to. And I will tell you too, sometimes a parent will come and say, I'm noticing that. And the teacher will say, yeah, it's 4th grade. Like, that's every kid, right? 4th grade, every kid is doing that. But sometimes the teacher will say, yeah, that is a concern, and we need to address it. Okay.
Thank you. All right. So there we go.
Okay, so the 504 evaluation, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it's really, it's the crux of it. Okay. So as part of the assessment or the evaluation, we consider input from teachers on current performance. What are we seeing right now? We consider input from parents and the student. We consider testing results, social and cultural background, adaptive behavior, cumulative school records, health records, psychological assessments, and other available reports and records. Basically, any data or information that we can gather to figure out what is going on with the specific student, we consider all of that. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, a doctor's report or a clinician's report, we consider that to be, even though we are not obligated to include it, we accept it gladly because we consider it to be valuable information to kind of help guide and inform our process. Okay.
And Wendy, this is a good point. There's a question. Can a student's physician be a team member?
Can a what?
A student's physician, so their doctor. Could they be a team member?
That is a really good question. And I will tell you that I have never seen that. Typically what happens is the doctor will provide us written notes or written orders or written recommendations. Okay, so we don't have, doctors don't come to 504 meetings typically. And I think basically, but you know, we have, like, what we do is we will have the parent sign an authorization for release or exchange of information so that our folks can contact, you know, like, if, again, I'm going to go back to diabetes. We have a student that has diabetes, then, you know, it's not going to be me that's calling the doctor. It's going to be our nurse contacting the doctor or contacting the medical practice to get that information. Likewise, if, you know, if we've got a student being assessed or evaluated or having qualified, and the student is now having a 504 plan and they have something to do with mental health. Okay, so they have ADHD or they have maybe they're suffering from anxiety or depression, and they have an outside, you know, because we have students that have a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a therapist outside of school. And so we will have parents do the sign the release, and then our school psychologist contacts those practitioners, and we really try to work as a team. But I will tell you that typically, you know, there've been a couple of times where maybe a therapist will attend a meeting, a 504 meeting. I have seen that. I don't typically see, like, medical doctors. I don't feel like they are able to, I think they have such crazy schedules that they mostly don't coincide with our schedule. So I just have never seen it. And, you know, we never would, you know, we don't require that.
And is there a number to the limit of evaluations done within the year?
So it's 1 per 12-month cycle.
Okay. And lastly, and I'll let you move on, is an IEP evaluation the same as a 504 evaluation? It
is not. So, Leanne, you mentioned earlier on about the least restrictive environment. Okay, so an IEP evaluation is much more extensive than a 504 evaluation. So on occasion, the site team will do, they can do rating scales, they'll do surveys, they can, you know, there's different things that they can and will do, but it's not nearly as extensive as the special ed evaluation.
Okay. And let's see, I see a comment. Mandy, I'm just going to reply to you that it sounds like you might be having trouble in a certain situation. I will make sure to, in that email tomorrow, will be all of the contact information for myself and for Wendy. And so you will, you're able to reach out to either one of us if you're having, you know, if any of you families are having difficulties that you want to talk about. All right. So let me go along here. There we go.
Okay, so thank you, Leanne. According to the 504 law, a person is considered to have a disability if that person has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. If they have a record of such an impairment, or if they are regarded as having such an impairment. So again, this comes back to if they have a diagnosis or if they are suspected of having a disability. Okay. Okay, and now we're getting into what qualifies as a substantially handicapping condition. It means that an individual is unable to perform a major life activity that the average person in the general population can perform, okay? Or they are significantly restricted as to the condition, manner, or duration for which an individual can perform a major life activity as compared to the average person in the general population. So the average person meaning their peers that don't have that disability. Okay, a person has a substantial limitation when one or more life activities are restricted as to the conditions, manner, or duration under which they can be performed in comparison to most people. And these are the things that were changed under the ADA Amendments Act of 2008 and went into effect in 2009. Okay, so major life activities include caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, working, and other. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, okay? And I will tell you that prior to the amendment to the ADA, that prior to that amendment in 2009, this list was really limited to learning, concentrating, reading. Okay, it was pretty narrow. And so the Congress in 2008 said that isn't what we meant back in 1973, which I can't imagine that there were any of the same people that were in 1973 serving on the Congress in 2008, but they determined in 2008 that we've been for the last 40 years interpreting this the wrong way. We meant broad coverage. Okay, so that's why so many more major life activities have been included. Okay. Are there any disabilities that ensure 504 eligibility according to OCR? And OCR is the Office for Civil Rights. They're kind of the governing body over, that is a federal office. It's the Federal Office for Civil Rights, and they are the governing body over Section 504. And they state that there is no disability, disorder, condition, or impairment that automatically makes an individual eligible under Section 504. So not all ADD or ADHD students are covered by Section 504, only when the disability substantially limits a major life activity like learning, okay, or any of the others. So I know there's kind of an urban myth out there that if a student, we have a lot of students that have ADHD, and they don't all have a 504 plan. They don't all automatically qualify for a 504 plan. Okay. Same thing. If they have diabetes, that is not an automatic. We have to go through our process. Okay. And once again, it's a team decision. After completing the 504 evaluation, it's a team decision whether the student meets eligibility under Section 504 requirements. The safety is within the team. No single person makes the decision. So just to kind of put an example on that, if our school psychologist does an evaluation of a student, it's not just their job to determine if that student's going to be eligible. They're going to make their recommendation, and then the team's going to determine if the child is eligible. Okay. A student is not substantially limited simply because there's a perception that the student is not reaching his or her potential. Neither Section 504 nor the IDEA requires that. And again, you know, that's kind of a lofty paragraph, but what does that mean? So just because a student is getting poor grades, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to qualify for a Section 504 plan. Or just be, you know, same thing with special ed. Just because a child is not performing well in school, it doesn't mean that they're going to be a special ed student or they're going to get an IEP. So that's why we have to do our evaluations to determine if they meet those prongs of eligibility.
And Wendy, that brings us back to a question I saw a little bit ago that I wanted to circle back to, is on the flip side, if a child is getting good grades, does that mean they automatically don't qualify for a 504 either?
Right, it does not.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I think I might have said it earlier, maybe not. So we have students that are GATE students that have all A's, that have, you know, that are AP kids, AP students in high school that maybe have a 504 plan because they have a qualifying disability and they were able to meet the prongs of eligibility.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is an interesting idea, and there is sometimes some confusion around this. And I'm coming back to OCR because, like I said, that is our governing agency, right? That really oversees Section 504 compliance. And parents cannot choose between 504 and IDEA or IEP. Okay. OCR has stated that parents have no flexibility to choose between Section 504 and IDEA services. And what I mean by that, or what that means, is that if a student qualifies for a IEP, the parent cannot, like, once we have determined that the student qualifies for an IEP, the parent can't say they don't want the IEP and they'd rather just have a 504 plan. Okay, that is not allowed. And the other thing I want to say about that too, it's kind of along the same lines. If a student doesn't qualify for an IEP, okay, the team doesn't just turn around and automatically give them a 504 plan. They have to have qualified. They have to have also met that, you know, so the team may assess them for an IEP for special ed services, and they didn't qualify. The team will say, we believe that they did meet they did meet eligibility for Section 504. Okay, but again, it goes back to least restrictive environment. Once they have met that eligibility for an IEP, they can't decline it and kind of default into a 504 plan, because sometimes that does come up. Okay. Okay, so once again, and I just kind of touched on that, a 504 plan is not a consolation prize for when a student doesn't qualify for an IDEA. We're not going to just offer them a 504 plan to, like, keep parents happy, and, you know, if they're upset they didn't qualify for the IEP, they actually have to qualify for the 504 plan. Okay, And a 504 plan is not for students because the doctor just said they need 504 accommodations. Again, we have to evaluate them, and it's not a plan to appease parents. It really is about a disability or a suspected disability to, in order to provide accommodations for a student that has that disability or suspected disability that substantially limits or impacts a major life function.
On that note, Wendy, there's a question. If a student graduates out of the IEP, so for you folks that aren't familiar with that, an IEP ends at age 18, or well, when a child finishes high school, it could be 22. Well, that's a whole nother webinar. Check out the FRC YouTube channel, you'll hear all about it. But when they graduate out of the IEP, will they automatically move to a 504?
No, that doesn't typically happen. But what I would do is, if I would contact the site team to see, because if your child has an IEP and they are intending to go to college, depending on what the disability is, I would contact the site team to talk about getting a 504 plan to take with them to college. But it's not automatic. Okay. So I think I've already talked about all this stuff. Section 504 doesn't promise or guarantee results or success. It doesn't promise an unfair advantage, and it doesn't promise placement, which means a teacher, classroom, or school site. What it does promise is non-discrimination, and that we will do everything in our power to level the playing field with the students and the peers that are not disabled. Equal access and non-discrimination. Okay, so FAPE under the IDEA, again, that's free appropriate public education. For special education, what that means is, in related services, they're provided at no charge. They meet the state standards. They include appropriate preschool, elementary school, or secondary school education, and in conformity with an IEP. Okay, and on the next slide, it's how it's different under Section 504. So free appropriate public education under Section 504 is the provision of regular or special education and related aids and services that are designed to meet individual educational needs of handicapped person as adequately as the needs of non-handicapped are met. Okay. Okay. Can 504 students be disciplined? Yes, they can. We do have what we call the behavior manifest determination. So if a student that has a 504 plan engages in behavior that results in suspension and possible sendover, they can be disciplined and they can be suspended. Okay. Okay, so how is a 504 plan similar to an IEP, and how is it different? So the ways that it's similar is that we do an assessment or an evaluation. We hold annual meetings to check on the plan, make sure it's helping, okay? Or if it's not helping, then how can we make sure that it does help? We provide accommodations on standard testing. Sometimes we have related services that can help, like consult with the team. So we don't typically have related services. And by related services, I mean our visually impaired teachers, our deaf, hard of hearing. They don't provide direct services, but they will provide consult for a team, for a student that has a visual impairment, or they are deaf or hard of hearing, or some of the physical, like we don't have occupational therapists providing services, but they will consult a team if necessary. And same thing with the physical therapist, same adaptive PE. Although sometimes we do have students that are in the adaptive PE class. And complaints are made to Office for Civil Rights. How is it different? Typically on a 504 plan, you're going to see accommodations, and an IEP plan is going to be more modifications. Okay, it's much more specific to the student, and it can alter, it can alter the standard, right, on the IEP. So on section 504, we can't alter the standard or the curriculum. Okay, so that's one way that it's different. Okay, so I think people are probably wondering what do we, because I've talked a lot about what a 504 plan is and what it is not. But one of the things, the most important thing I think that happens on a 504 plan is we provide accommodations. Okay, and accommodations are the actual supports that the student may require to successfully demonstrate learning. But they don't change the expectations to the curriculum grade levels. Okay, they don't fundamentally alter anything that's happening in that student's class. And the other thing is that if a student has a 504 plan, it doesn't appear on a transcript anywhere. So I think that's an important thing to note. Okay, so Leanne, can we go to the next slide? Okay, so once again, accommodations do not fundamentally alter or lower a course standard, but what it might look like is preferential seating for a student, and that could be anywhere in the classroom. I mean, there's a ton of accommodations that we can provide. It might mean that a student needs, if a student has ADHD, they might need to have frequent breaks, or like we chunk assignments so they don't get overwhelmed when we do it all at one time. If a student that has, let's just say a life-threatening food allergy, so we work to accommodate for that, in that if it's something that like we see a lot of peanut allergies, if we need to try to make a nut-free classroom or a nut-free table in the cafeteria for the student that has the peanut allergy, we do that. We sometimes have to alter the space, right? Or when they get to middle school, we have to create sometimes accommodations on a campus, for instance, that a student will be able to go to a specific window at the cafeteria because there will be no nut products sold out of that window. Okay, or we monitor it's about education. The food allergies are hard sometimes because depending on what school site the student is at and what grade level, depending on the involvement of food in that classroom environment, we have to do a lot of educating with that. So that would be considered, that's how we're accommodating that. We're educating the other parents in the classroom for that, we have a child in this class that has a very severe allergy. Please don't send that particular food with your child into that classroom. So it just, again, it varies from site to site and classroom to classroom and student to student. Okay. But we have tons of accommodations that we can provide to help to level the playing field for the individual child. So these are just some examples of how we accommodate it with communication. How do we, sometimes depending on the grade level of the child, how the communication occurs between the classroom and home, right? I mean, that can vary. Organization and management, that's a big one for children that have ADHD, they really struggle with that. Well, we put some things into place to help them get organized, to help them learn how to be organized, because we consider it our job to help arm them and teach them how to manage their ADHD, how to become more organized as habits, right? Because they're always going to have ADHD, but how do they learn to live with that in the world? So the accommodations are really geared towards that. Okay, so some other examples, there's sometimes it'll come up like with testing, for example, if a student has, trouble with testing for some reason, they might need to be in an alternative environment for the testing, or they might need to do oral testing or what, there's just different things that we can do. And it's hard to really talk about accommodations, because it all depends on the disability, like I said, the disability, the student, the grade level, the school, the classroom, it's all those things, and it varies from student to student. Okay, so modifications, we see those more on an IEP. Okay, they may fundamentally alter or lower a course standard. An example of that is out of level curriculum or an altered performance standard. And those are reflected on grades and transcripts.
So Wendy, as an example, if a child maybe in what they need is the teacher and the parents saying, Johnny needs to only do 10 of the questions on his homework sheet instead of all 20. Is that a modification or an accommodation?
Okay, that's a really good question. And that depends on let's just say, if the child can show mastery of the subject in that reduced number of questions, then that would be an accommodation. But if they can't, one of the things that's like that has come up quite a bit lately with math, because math has changed so dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years, right? So it used to be they get a page, they get a textbook page, do page 37 in your math book, and it's 50 questions. And you could do like, okay, we're going to reduce that to half for a child that needs a, reduction. Well, now it's harder to do that because there's fewer number of math problems on an assignment. So it just depends on, the subject. As long as they can show mastery of the subject, then that reduced workload is an accommodation.
Got it. Thank you. All right.
Oh, I guess that's the end.
Was that the end? No.
Yeah. So one thing I want as a reminder, and then I'm happy to respond to questions if we have questions. So if you feel that your child has possibly a disability, or that your child has a disability and you're seeing some struggles, some things that are concerning you, go to your school site and start that conversation. Like, let them know that you have a concern. And then the other thing is, if your child has a 504 plan and you have some concerns, contact the school, or as Leanne said, you can contact me. She's going to send you my email address. You can contact me and let me know, hey, I'm having concerns. I'm not quite sure. And a lot of times it's really about communication. A lot of times a parent doesn't necessarily know, or they feel like they're not being told, and they need to have a conversation so that we get that information to parents, because parents need the information about what's
Right.
happening with their student. And so, but you can always email me, and I'm happy to contact a school on your behalf and get to the bottom of it, because I feel that a parent should never, ever feel like they don't know where to go. They don't know who to talk to get help.
Mhm.
If you need help regarding what's going on with your child, I feel like we should make that easy for you. So that's what I want to do. That's what I'm here for.
And that's why I appreciate you, Wendy.
Back
Yeah.
at you, Leanne.
So let's go ahead. We're getting close to the wrap up time, but so let's tackle some of those questions, okay? And if you do need to go ahead and leave, please remember when you log off, you're going to see a screen pop up to do a short survey. Please take a moment to do that. Your feedback is so valuable to me and helps guide the FRC trainings that I put out there for you families. So please just take a moment. So let's go ahead and get into these questions. Okay. Well, I think you asked that. So what does a 504 plan actually do to help our children? I think you really got to that.
Well, I think just to recap that, it's really about, it's two things. The first thing is we provide accommodations to help level the playing field. Okay. And the second thing that it does is it does provide a layer of federal protections for your child. So that's just important to, I think, remember that. That's what it does.
Right. And so, and this is a great question. Is there a standard list of accommodations that the district adheres to, or is it open to anything as long as it doesn't change the standards?
That's a really good question. So, well, we do have a list that we start. We consider that our starting point. But I'll tell you that, if something comes, like sometimes we will get a recommendation from a therapist or a tutor or somebody that the child might be working with, and as long as we feel that it doesn't lower the standard like what you're asking, then we're always open to, because it's even if I have a 3-page list of accommodations, that's not everything. So, we're definitely open to something. Sometimes we have to get outside the box.
And I think too, like you said, Wendy, it's that as parents, bringing to the table what we're the experts on our children, as far as in, we know what our kiddos might need, and then the other team members, they're experts in education, and so it's bringing all that knowledge together, right? And brainstorming and collaborating and trying to pick each other's brains. You'd be surprised some of the ideas that come up with, and I think, man, that is brilliant.
Oh, 1,000%. And I will tell you, I have had parents, like what you just said, parents are the expert in their child. And when we were fairly new, I'm just going to use this example. When we were, for me, this has been, like I said, I've been in this job for 11 years and probably really started seeing the life-threatening peanut allergies really hardcore, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So it was parents that introduced me to helpful websites and things to find where foods are packaged in environmentally safe factories and all that kind, how to find the right food. And so I have shared that, I appreciate that knowledge that parents bring, because again, their parents are living with this 24 hours and 7 days a week. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard for a school staff too. There's so many different situations. Like you said, every situation is unique. Even two kiddos with the same diagnosis or the same disability, right? Can
Right.
look very differently.
Correct.
And so again, parents bring to the table what you know, and collaborate. Okay, so let's get to another question. Is dyslexia a qualifying disability for a 504 or an IEP?
It could be a qualifying disability for both, is my understanding. I mean, I
Mhm.
know that I have known students that have qualified for an IEP. I don't know if dyslexia was the only disability that they had,
Mhm.
but um,
Right,
same thing with 504. Like,
right. So there are, Hugo, there are 13 categories of eligibility. And so, and I can, for an IEP, and I can include that information for you or if you want to email me at the Family Resource Center or call me, I'm happy to give you more information about what an IEP is and how that's different than a 504. Here is a good question. Again from Hugo. Does a 504 or IEP provide for individual tutoring if a child is found to have a learning disability?
so no, it isn't. I don't know about, I can't speak about an IEP, but
Mhm.
a 504 does not provide outside tutoring. But I will tell you that we have every school site, depending on where the child is, most of the school sites provide tutoring opportunities. I think it just depends on where your child is located.
Okay. And here is a great question from Jeanette. How would a high school site be able to help a child get a 504 for college when the college has to review and determine what accommodations they can provide?
How would a high school site be able to help a child get a 504 for college? Well, so the 504, a high school a child shouldn't be getting a 504 plan just for college. Like we should be qualifying them if they are eligible before they go to college. I think maybe I'm not understanding the question
Well, the
entirely.
way I'm interpreting that is she's saying, and again, I correct me if I'm wrong, Jeanette, but I think what I'm hearing is that how would a high school lay out a 504 plan, when the college is the one who has to determine what accommodations they're able to provide. So in my mind, it would be that it's not that the college is necessarily going to implement that exact plan, but it's laying out what that child's needs are, right? And then the college can take that and work with you through their
Right.
student services department, and talk about what type of accommodations.
Yes, you have to go the student has to go at that college to their DSP&S
Mhm.
department. And my understanding is they have to apply for, they have to start a relationship with that department and take the plan that they have. And beyond that, like I've known of a couple of situations at a UC, and sometimes they but they provide things like I know a young lady that went to Berkeley, and that campus was so hilly, right? It's
Mhm.
that per her disability, her handicapping condition, she was able to get a ride that was provided by the campus to
Mhm.
to her different classes. So again, it's hard. We're not going to write a 504 plan that is tailored to college. We're going to write the 504 plan that is tailored for the student at our school. And then, like you said, they have to take it to the DSPS department at that college, and they will do whatever they need to do with the student to adjust, depending on what is applicable there.
Yes, and families, as I mentioned, and you'll see the link tomorrow as well in my email, but the FRC has a YouTube channel with recorded webinars, and I'm telling you, you would be shocked at changes that happen after high school. I as a parent had no idea, and I thought I was really prepared. And so if you want to check out the webinar about life after high school, feel free. Here's another question that I thought was interesting too. What happens next year if I request a 504 evaluation this year?
Okay, what happens?
So
sorry, I was just responding.
we're in March, right? So I
Right.
think what this mom is asking is if tomorrow they requested that, okay, what would happen next year with that 504?
Okay, so it depends on, let's say we get started now and we're able to complete the evaluation, then we would start that 504 plan and the student would start it the next year with it. If we are running, because we're getting into that timeline when we're kind of running out of days in the calendar. So it just depends. It depends on if the site is able to complete it before the end of school, or it might get moved to the top priority for when we return to school next year. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you said, because there's that timeline. And so, okay. And I think that was all the questions. I think we got to them all. So, and we're just about at 8 o'clock. Good job. High five, everyone. We did it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, again, I will send you all an email in the morning. I normally am a little more organized at the beginning of the webinars and have my whole housekeeping screen, but just so you know, I was a little discombobulated this time, so I didn't quite get to that. But rest assured, tomorrow you will see an email from me with all the resources from tonight. Please take a moment to fill out the survey. Thank you to Rebecca for interpreting. Thank you to Wendy for sharing all your knowledge. Much appreciation to you ladies, and thank you families for joining us. It was good to be together, and we will talk soon. So good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Leanne,
Yes?
Can I talk to you for a minute?
Oh, sure, absolutely. All right. Hold on. Let me